You know, you've probably heard it, at least 100 times.
Oh, easily, yeah.
Right. Like maybe your boss said it to you during a performance review, or you saw it on one of those motivational posters in a waiting room or something.
Or a politician using it in a stump speech.
Yes, exactly. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. I mean, it's the ultimate slogan for making it on your own. It paints this whole picture of, solitary hard work and socioeconomic triumph and just relying on nobody but yourself.
Right, the classic self-made ideal.
Right. But what if I told you that the people who originally coined this phrase, they weren't trying to motivate you at all? Like, they were actually insulting you.
It's kind of wild to think about.
It really is. So today, we are taking a deep dive into an incredible piece of historical and linguistic research. It basically traces the bizarre journey of this single phrase.
And it is quite a journey.
Yeah. We're going to explore how a grouping of words that was literally meant to mock the impossible somehow became the serious foundational mandate for the American dream.
Okay, let's unpack this because the article we're diving into today reveals a massive historical aha moment right off the bat.
It really does.
This phrase originally meant the exact opposite of self-sufficiency. It was born as a highly sarcastic joke.
Yeah, and I mean, it really changes how you look at all the idioms we just take for granted. We treat words as if they have these fixed, permanent definitions.
Right, like they've always meant what they mean today.
Exactly. But tracing this phrase, it gives us a window into how an entire society's mindset can shift over a century. So this isn't just about, fun cocktail party trivia.
Though it is great trivia.
Oh, for sure. But it's really about how language gets hijacked. We're looking at a phrase that started as a very specific insult designed to mock a physical impossibility, which eventually mutated into this cultural mandate.
A mandate that, like, millions of people measure their own self-worth against today? Precisely. And understanding that mechanism, how a joke becomes a law of social dynamics, it helps us understand the power of the words we use every single day.
So to really grasp how this phrase flipped its meaning so completely, we kind of need to ground ourselves in the literal physical reality of the joke. Like, we need to look at the physics of the absurd.
The biomechanics of it, really.
Yeah. So picture this for a second for everyone listening. You're wearing a pair of heavy 19th century leather boots, and the bootstraps, the phrase is talking about, they're those little leather loops sewn onto the back or the sides of the collar.
Right, and you just slide your fingers into them to help pull the tight leather over your heel.
Exactly. They have a single practical purpose.
To give your hands leverage against your foot. That's it.
Right. So now imagine putting those boots on, you're standing flat on the floor, reaching down to grab those leather loops, and then pulling up with your arms to lift your entire body weight into the air.
It's just ridiculous.
It's pure cartoon logic. It's the equivalent of like a cartoon character grabbing the scruff of their own neck and just flying away, or, trying to pick yourself up by your own shoelaces. It fundamentally defies the laws of physics.
Because you cannot act as a fulcrum for your own mass.
Right.
And that blatant defiance of physics was the entire point when the phrase was first published. If we look at the etymological research of Barry Popick and the linguist Ben Zimmer.
Two guys who really dug into the archives for this.
Oh, deeply. They traced this idiom all the way back to an 1834 newspaper article, which is, decades before anyone was using it to describe a strong work ethic.
Okay, wait, 1834. So we're talking mid-19th century. Who are they even writing about to prompt such a highly specific physical joke?
A man named Nimroda Mёrfri.
Нимрода Мёрфри, you can't make that up.
You really can. So Mr. Mёrfri was making headlines at the time because he claimed to have finally cracked the secret to perpetual motion.
Perpetual motion? Oh, wait. So he was basically claiming he had invented a machine that could run forever without any external energy source.
That was his claim, yeah.
So he was claiming he literally broke the laws of thermodynamics. I mean, no wonder the press went after him.
Right. And even though the formal laws of thermodynamics were still being, codified at that time, scientists and engineers already knew that a machine running endlessly without an energy input was just a resolute impossibility.
It's a scam.
Exactly. Mёrfri was making a fraudulent claim. So in response to this, an 1834 newspaper wrote this highly sarcastic teardown of him. They teased his impossible machine by writing, and I quote, "Probably Mr. Mёrfri has succeeded in handing himself over the Cumberland River or a barnyard fence by the straps of his boots."
Handing himself over the Cumberland River by the straps of his boots.
I mean, that is just a wonderfully vivid, biting piece of 19th century snark, isn't it? And what's fascinating here is that The imagery was engineered to be undeniably ludicrous. Ben Zimmer pointed out in his research that, pulling on those straps while wearing the boots wouldn't move you an inch.
Not even a millimeter.
Right. So the newspaper used that specific imagery to highlight the sheer absurdity of Murfree's claim. In 1834, telling someone they were pulling themselves up by their bootstraps was the linguistic equivalent of saying, "Sure, and I suppose pigs will fly next."
It's the ultimate intellectual eye roll.
Precisely.
But obviously, this wasn't just one isolated writer taking a swing at Нимрода Мёрфри, right? Because if we still say it today, the joke must have really caught on.
Oh, it gained incredible traction. Throughout the rest of the 19th and early 20th centuries, variations of this phrase appeared in print all over the place, universally used to poke fun at attempts to do the impossible.
Do we have other examples from that time?
Yeah, a great example pops up in a 1908 issue of Popular Mechanics.
Okay, an engineering magazine. So they definitely understood the mechanical impossibility of the phrase.
Exactly, and they applied it perfectly. So the writers were describing a steam engine piston that had become completely stuck. The pressure had perfectly balanced in both ends of the cylinder.
Oh, I see. So because the pressure was equalized, the piston was just entirely locked in place.
Deadlocked. So the magazine wrote that the piston could not move any more than a man can lift himself by his bootstraps.
See, that paints such a clear picture. It's being used as the definitive benchmark for an event that absolutely cannot happen under the laws of nature.
We actually see that exact same usage in the North American Review around the same time.
Oh, really?
Yeah. A writer there was detailing this palpably absurd political act, and they compared it to the efforts of a man attempting to lift himself by the straps of his boots. The consensus was ironclad across the board. This is a joke. This is impossible. Stop trying to defy gravity.
Okay, but this is the part that I'm stuck on. If engineers in 1908 were still using this as a physics joke to describe a stuck steam piston, how did it suddenly show up just a few decades later as, like, an inspirational quote?
It is a massive jump.
Right. You don't just go from mocking a fraud to praising a pioneer by accident overnight. Did the definition of impossible just shift from physics to society?
That is essentially what happened, yes. The transition occurred slowly, and it was mostly facilitated by literature. Writers started to move the phrase away from literal mechanics.
Okay.
They began mapping that concept of physical impossibility onto the concept of social immobility. They used it as a metaphor to describe the incredibly difficult, nearly impossible act of social climbing.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. So instead of lifting your physical body over a barnyard fence, you are trying to lift your social standing over the rigid barriers of class or poverty.
Exactly. It's still a nearly impossible feat, but in a socioeconomic sense rather than a physical one.
Wow. Who actually started using it that way first?
Well, the first recorded use of the phrase in a modern socioeconomic context actually comes from James Joyce.
Wait, really? James Joyce?
Yeah. In his linguistically experimental 1922 novel, Ulysses, Joyce wrote a line describing people who, quote, had forced their way to the top from the lowest rung by the aid of their bootstraps.
Man, James Joyce. I mean, the author who famously bent and broke the English language to serve his narrative needs.
He loved playing with idioms.
It totally tracks that he would take a well-known physics joke and bend it into a metaphor for upward mobility, force their way to the top from the lowest rung. I mean, you can hear the immense struggle in that phrasing, right? Just recognizing that the act borders on the impossible.
You really can. But here is the crucial missing link in the timeline that a lot of people miss.
Okay, what is it?
Even as the phrase evolved in the 1920s to describe socioeconomic triumph, it still retained a heavy, heavy layer of its original absurdity.
Really? So it wasn't fully serious yet?
Not at all. People recognized that claiming to have succeeded entirely alone was still as ridiculous as claiming to fly. And because of that lingering absurdity, the whole idea of the American bootstrapper became a massive target of international mockery.
Particularly from Great Britain, right?
Oh, yes, very much so.
I read this part of the source material, and the British side-eye is just dripping with 1920s transatlantic disdain.
It's savage. In 1927, the British Sunday Times published an editorial that viciously mocked the American obsession with aggressive progress. They took direct aim at this evolving concept of the American bootstrapper.
What did they?
The editorial read, and I quote, "The great American ideal is that everybody should become something he is not. The great American tragedy is to remain what you are. Resulting from this theory of progress and happiness is the phenomenon of the American bootstrapper."
The great American tragedy is to remain what you are. Oof. That is a cutting
It's
assessment.
incredibly sharp.
They are skewering the foundational anxiety of the American dream, basically this idea that if you aren't constantly climbing, you are failing.
And they didn't stop there. The editorial continued. Now, everyone has heard of the American bootlegger. But the bootstrapper is an even greater national figure, just as the feat of lifting oneself by one's bootstraps is an almost entirely American accomplishment.
I love that. Comparing the bootstrapper to a bootlegger is just brilliant snark. Because, keep in mind for you listening, this is 1927. America is deep into prohibition.
Right. Bootleggers are everywhere.
So the British editorial is essentially saying, sure, your country is famous for criminals smuggling alcohol, but your real national icon is the guy trying to perform a literal magic trick to get rich.
Exactly. And I really want you, listening, to consider how other cultures view our idioms, because it reveals so much about underlying values. What sounded to Americans like a noble pursuit, the relentless drive to climb the ladder, it sounded to the 1920s British establishment like a recipe for societal disaster.
Because it disrupts the class structure.
Completely. The Sunday Times concluded that this bootstrapping obsession leads to putting second-rate people in first-class positions.
Wow. Tell us how you really feel, Sunday Times.
Right. And they warned that this chaotic system of upward mobility works fine only as long as there is plenty of room for ambitious people, and, quote, so long as there is no sudden crisis.
Man, it is a brutal critique of upward mobility from a society built on a very rigid class structure. The British saw this impossible act of lifting yourself up not as heroic, but as putting unqualified people in power simply because they were arrogant enough to try the impossible.
It perfectly demonstrates that even as the phrase became linked to success, it was still viewed by many observers as fundamentally absurd and potentially dangerous.
So what does this all mean? Like, we have a phrase that starts as a sarcastic joke about a fake inventor. It becomes a socioeconomic metaphor in an experimental Irish novel, and then it serves as the punchline of a British editorial mocking American ambition.
A very weird resume for a phrase.
It really is. It feels like a sarcastic meme that society slowly over decades simply forgot was a joke. Like, they just started taking it entirely literally.
Well, society essentially willed itself to forget the joke because it needed the slogan. Linguists suggest that during the mid-20th century, particularly post-World War II and during the early Cold War, the United States placed a heavy, defining emphasis on rugged individualism.
Oh, sure. The whole Red Scare era.
Exactly. The culture needed a shorthand to contrast its capitalist ideals with collectivist societies. In that climate, society cognitively decoupled the phrase from its physical absurdity. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps, officially transformed into a serious motivational directive. The irony just vanished.
And just to pause here for a second for you listening, I mean, our goal today isn't to take a side on modern politics or debate the validity of the American dream itself.
Right, absolutely not.
We're strictly looking at what the historical sources and modern psychologists are saying about the friction between the bizarre history of this phrase and how it is used as a standard today. Just reporting the critique outlined in the sources.
And that friction is substantial. The modern debate centers on the expectation of succeeding entirely on one's own. Critics point to the historical reality of the American West, for instance.
Okay, how so?
Well, the early American pioneers are often held up as the ultimate bootstrappers who tames the frontier with nothing but grit. Yet historical records show they often did so with massive government assistance.
Oh, right, through legislation like the Homestead Act of 1862.
Yeah.
Which essentially gave away millions of acres of federal land to private citizens.
Exactly.
Not to mention, government-subsidized railroads and military protection. So the critique is that the solitary nature of the bootstrap myth simply doesn't align with the historical reality of how success was actually achieved.
The phrase implies a solitary journey that rarely existed in a vacuum. You cannot separate personal hard work, which, to be clear, is very real and important, from the systemic infrastructure that makes that work fruitful.
That makes total sense.
And that critique extends beyond history and economics, going deep into the realm of modern psychology. The source material highlights that psychologists actively warn against applying the bootstraps mentality to mental health.
Because you can't just grit your teeth and outwork clinical depression.
Precisely. Psychologists point out that you cannot simply wrest yourself out of a psychological quagmire through solitary willpower alone. Mental health issues often involve deep physiological factors,
Hmm.
brain chemistry, or systemic trauma.
Right. So if someone is dealing with severe trauma, telling them to just pull themselves up by their bootstraps is literally literalizing the old joke.
It really is.
You're telling them to defy the physics of their own brain chemistry using nothing but their bare hands. It minimizes the reality of their struggle by suggesting the solution is just a matter of trying harder.
And this raises an important question about how the idioms we use set unrealistic expectations for ourselves and others. If we demand that someone overcome a hurdle using a metaphor rooted in physical impossibility, we shouldn't be surprised or judgmental when they require outside help to achieve it.
That is such a powerful way to look at it. But here's where it gets really interesting.
Oh yes, the pivot.
Because this phrase didn't just stay in the realms of sociology, literature, and psychology. It actually took on a highly literal technical life in a realm you might never expect. I'm talking about the device you are probably using to listen to this deep dive right now.
That's my favorite part of the story.
Every single time you open your laptop or turn on your phone, you are directly referencing 19th century footwear.
The linguistic branch from physical boots to early computing is just one of the most elegant parts of this whole history. It traces back to the engineers building the very first computers in the 1950s.
Okay, wait. How does an 1834 joke about perpetual motion end up in a 1950s computer lab?
Well, the engineers faced a massive paradox. To get a computer to start up, they needed to load code into its memory. But to load that code, the computer already needed to be running.
Ah, it's the ultimate chicken and egg problem.
Exactly. It was a system that needed to start itself from nothing.
It's like needing a key to open a locked box, but the key is locked inside the box itself. You have to somehow lift the system off the ground using only the resources of the offline system. So how did they actually do it?
In the earliest days, an operator would literally have to physically flip a series of manual switches on the computer console.
Wait, manual switches? Like physical toggles?
Physical toggles. Flipping these switches would load a tiny, very basic instruction set into the computer's memory. And that tiny instruction set would then tell the computer to read a paper punch card,
Oh, wow.
which contained a slightly larger program, which would then finally load the full operating system.
So they were slowly building momentum, using a tiny piece of the system to pull up the rest of the system.
Yes. And the engineers recognized the sheer mechanical absurdity of what they were doing because it felt like a system trying to lift itself up by its own bootstraps. They literally called that manual process of flipping switches bootstrapping.
No way. So bootstrapping became the official technical term for making the impossible happen in early computer science.
It did. And over time, as computers became more sophisticated, and you no longer had to physically flip switches to start them, the term bootstrapping naturally shortened. Became the phrase we all use every single day. Boot up.
That is just brilliant. When I say, hold on, my computer is booting up, I am unknowingly referencing the leather straps on a pair of 19th century boots.
Memoir.
There is such a beautiful poetic justice to that. A phrase that started out as a sarcastic teardown of Нимрода Mёrfri's fake perpetual motion machine, a machine that runs on its own, it actually became the foundational term for the closest thing we have to a perpetual motion machine today. The self-starting modern computer.
Language is incredibly resilient, and it never stops evolving, right? The source text notes that boot up has even spawned its own modern slang evolution today, branching far outside of tech.
Oh, right, yeah. Depending on your spelling, your pronunciation, and as the article wonderfully puts it, your life choices, boot up has a whole new set of meanings now.
It really does.
It can refer to getting a new project started, it can be street slang for using drugs, or it can even refer to settling into a new romantic relationship, like the phrase just refuses to sit still.
It's constantly adapting to whatever society needs it to mean.
So let's take a step back and just look at the incredible path of the bootstrap that we've charted today.
It's a lot of ground to cover.
It starts in an 1834 newspaper as a sarcastic jab at a fraud named Нимрода Мёрфри. It travels across the century as a physics joke, gets picked up by James Joyce in 1922 to describe grueling social climbing, and then gets hurled back at America by the British in 1927 as a warning about unqualified ambition.
And then the irony gets erased.
Exactly. Against all odds, a post-war society scrubs away the irony to turn it into the deeply contested, serious slogan for the American dream. And finally, it shrinks down into the microchips of our daily lives to become the reason our computers boot up.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it serves as a profound reminder that language is a living, breathing entity. Words do not have permanent definitions etched in stone. They are entirely malleable.
They can be whatever we want them to be.
Exactly. A phrase can completely reverse its own meaning, shifting from an insult mocking the impossible to a societal mandate demanding the impossible, based entirely on the cultural desires and the shifting values of the time.
So to you, our listener, the next time you are facing a difficult challenge and someone tells you to just pull yourself up by your bootstraps, you don't have to feel inadequate. You can just confidently smile, knowing that they are technically, historically speaking, asking you to perform a magic trick.
And that leaves us with a final thought for you to mull over today.
What is it?
If our society's ultimate, most famous motivational slogan for solitary success is deeply rooted in an act that is fundamentally physically impossible, what does that say about the limits of human language to shape our expectations of reality? By demanding that we achieve the impossible all on our own, without any safety nets or community support, are we in some way still just chasing Nimroda Mёrfri's perpetual motion machine?